Sarah, you ready? Ready? Okay, we're now back in session at 12:26. Judge, do you have more, or you passing?
Yes, just
Okay.
2 more questions.
Okay.
Mr. Elizondo, you're talking about policies and procedures. What is the response when people are not necessarily following all the policies and procedures? What kind of rehabilitation activities do you have once you identify that someone has made an error or not had insufficient documentation? What is the normal manner in which you handle that?
Sure. Our response depends on the gravity of the issues. So in situations where we think where the line's been definitely crossed, we're going to respond more intensely by involving the HR department, by involving, whatever, it depends on what it is. In a typical situation when we just have, all right, there's a couple of situations here where maybe they did pay sales tax, or maybe they don't have the correct documentation for something. We issue what you saw in one of the exhibits, the memorandum to the school saying, hey, here's the issues that you have, correct them. And then we have training available to them to say, at any time they can call our office and say, I need a refresher, I'm confused about this, or I'm trying to do this, and how can I do it? And then every year we offer training to all of our employees at all of our campuses to make sure that they know what our expectations are, that they know about the manual, that it's out there if they're going to get involved in any kind of collections of money or disbursements of money, that they refer to that manual because that's their guide. But they're always welcome to call us. So typically, it's just notifying them, hey, you're not following our procedures or policies. You need to go ahead and acknowledge that. If you don't agree with us and you think you are, tell us about that so we can have a discussion about it. But if you agree, sign the document, send it back saying, yep, you're right, we didn't do it, and we're going to make sure we do it next year. We're going to read up and get whatever training we need, and we're good to go. And that's the extent of it.
And what, you said if you crossed the line, was there a line crossed here?
In our opinion, yes, sir.
And what was that line?
When there were checks that were not being signed by 2 separate individuals, that we felt one person, or somebody was,
Is that it?
that's one of them.
What's the other one?
The other one is that there was a check made payable to a vendor that had the same last name as the principal of that school. There were too many transactions. It wasn't just one or two, it was too many transactions that have no documentation. And the problem was that in the prior year, we had the same issue. So there was no improvement in following those processes or procedures. Those were the main items that when we started looking at them as a whole, thinking there are some problems here. We need to go back and investigate and see what's going on at the school.
Okay. Does anyone in your office have special training in document examination?
I'm not sure what you mean by special training.
Handwriting expert?
Oh, no, sir, we don't have any handwriting experts.
Okay. But, I mean, common sense, you can look at something at some time and just see that it's inconsistent with something else that you have, right?
I don't want to call it common sense, but the appearance of it not being exactly, it doesn't match a signature card. It doesn't match a signature we're compared to
And when
looking
you
at.
see a signature that is suspect, what information does that tell you other than it's not the right signature?
That's what it tells us, exactly that. And then we have to be concerned about, there are a lot of possibilities as to why that's not the right signature. Whether somebody was signing without anybody else, without the person's name is being signed, knowing that it was being signed, or whether, there's a lot of possibilities. We don't know if those expenses were being made for personal gain by the person who signed them. So we had to ask questions and try to determine, okay, why was this happening? Where is it? And some of these, it was difficult to determine whether it was personal gain or not because there was no documentation attached to the thing, so we couldn't just look at it right off the bat and say, oh, the receipts are here, the invoices are here, and this is obviously what happened. So we couldn't even make that inference from looking at documentation because there was nothing there.
Okay, I mean, and I'm not trying to be facetious or anything.
Yes, sir.
There could be no personal gain from Education Service Center Region 20. I'm looking at check number 1526.
Correct, and that particular one is signed by Ms. Ross. We felt like an original signature.
On MMS PTO, It says here, it was signed by her and that Ms. Hopkins and Johnson? No, that's not him. Then 000, then fixed asset or 1099able. What does that mean?
Which one do you want me to answer? Because you asked me a couple
Number
of, you
B,
made a couple
let's
of.
go to, I guess that's 5, Roman numeral 5.
Okay. That just means that particular purchase that was made, is that item something that is a fixed asset? And by that means, is it worth more than $5,000 that we track for the school district? Or it also could be an item that says 1099. In other words, that is a vendor, that is a private individual doing some kind of work that we had to send them a 1099 by IRS rules. And so that's what that test is trying to determine when we look at that.
You mean the PTO is a vendor for that?
When every single vendor that we use, we either mark this as an X or an O. And as you can tell there, this is marked with an X, saying that everything's okay. It's not a fixed asset, and it is not a 1099 vendor. If it was a problem, it would have been marked with an O there.
Okay. How about music and arts? Would that be something for private gain?
That particular check was not a forgery. That was signed by Ms. Hopkins and by Mr. Johnson.
Okay. And jumping for joy, inflatables?
Yes, sir. That was what we felt was a forgery. Again, we don't know what that is. It could have been somebody's birthday party that they were going to this particular place to go or buy things from them. We had no idea. Let me just make sure. There was no invoice printed out for this particular one, so we didn't really know what it was for.
And I wish you would deal with me for a minute. A very long time ago, I was head of Afro Sheen Hair Products, and one of our properties was we own Soul Train, and we had a person running it for us, and we brought in a advertising person, and that advertising person did an audit for Soul Train, and when they did an audit, they went to the people who issued the checks, then they went to the people that received the checks and made an inquiry. And we saw that there was an inconsistency, and were able to figure out what was going on. Did you go to any of the vendors to verify that they had actually received the money?
No, sir, we did not.
So the value of yours was to see how many documents were in support of a check, rather than whether the check was spent in the proper way.
It was both of those things, and also to make sure the checks cleared the bank, and the checks did clear the bank.
Okay. So there was an investigation, but the investigation was going talking to the people that issued the checks instead of the people that got the checks.
That is correct.
So did you find some other checks to Bobby Ross historically that this school had, that this district had issued to him?
I didn't look at anything beyond the year that we were auditing, and there were a few of them on here, 2 or 3 of them, I think.
There were 2. Were you aware that he had
Now,
provided
I'm sorry.
meals?
I'm sorry, back to your question. There was something that was provided to me from our auditor, our internal review person, that said that there were some checks in the previous year that were also paid.
Okay, and there were some checks authorized to Mr. Ross that came from someplace other than Metzger?
I couldn't tell you that, sir.
Okay. Were you aware that Mr. Ross had provided food for the district, other than Metzger?
I was not aware. However, that wouldn't have been an issue as long as all the proper paperwork would have been completed.
Okay. American Heart Association. Do you know what? Did you ever find out that did the American Heart Association actually get their money?
The check cleared the bank, so I can tell you that it was cleared. Now, I could look at the check if you would like for me to and see what bank account it was deposited to see if it says American Heart Association.
That's fine. We're going to move on. So I'm trying to get a sense of, when you say you drew the line, I think the line seems to me is the questionable signatures. And then the questionable signatures are, did you have any information did you have any information from your audit that Ms. Ross gave permission to anybody to use her signature?
Yeah, I'm going to object that the question is based upon facts.
I object to the objection. I'm asking him a question.
Well, he's asking questions that are not germane to the situation. He indicated that Mr. Elizondo was only concerned about the signatures on the checks. Mr. Elizondo testified to 3 different areas of concerns that he had, not just the signatures. And so the premise of that question is not accurate, and that's my objection.
And those other 2 beside the line, beside the checks being a problem, you would have dealt with them by rehabilitating the people by telling them what they need to do to correct. Isn't that correct? There's no correction for this.
Depending on what we determined after we asked questions about payments to Mr. Ross Jr.
Okay. And if, in fact, he delivered the goods that he was supposed to deliver and produced the documentation, that would be the end of it. Isn't that correct?
We would have still had to make sure that it was properly authorized by the supervisor, but I don't want to speak for everybody else involved because we just determine what the findings are and the concerns, but we don't always make the recommendation as to what should happen to the employee. If, again, as a whole, we can't just take a look at one thing. Sometimes if it's just one thing, we can rehabilitate using your words. But if it's, and again, depending on how the gravity of it, but if it's, when you start looking at a lot of things, then you start being concerned about, well, is there even any effort being made to try to follow our rules, of the procedures that are in place to safeguard the assets of the kiddos at school?
Are there safeguards in place to prevent overpayment of salaries and things like that too?
Yes, sir, there are.
All right. And when you violated those guidelines, how did they treat you?
It depended on what the situation was. And so we always try to collect, whenever we determine that there is an overpayment to somebody, we always try to get the money back.
Okay. And if you're responsible for the overpayment, did you receive any rehabilitative information?
No.
When Ms. Cruz, and when you overpaid $40,000 to retire for people that were no longer working for the school district, were you issued a non-renewal?
No.
Were you disciplined in any way?
No.
And it cost the school district $40,000?
Which we got every penny back.
And how did you get it back?
By contacting them and telling them they had to pay the money back, and they did.
And do you agree that all monies are accounted for, not properly documented, but they're accounted for?
I couldn't tell you that without invoices, without documentation to see what it was spent on.
Would the chief of police know more than you do?
You'd have to ask her that.
No, I'm asking you.
I
Does
can't
the chief
speak-
of police know more than you do about whether any monies are missing?
I'm going to object.
He
That's not a
objects. I
question
have
he
to,
could possibly
that's
answer.
speculative, sir. This police
do you mean
chief,
speculative?
the police chief, how does he know the police chief knows more than her, sir? I got to agree with Mr. Russo on this one. That's
I got the police chief's statement.
fine, sir, but you can't ask him if he knows more than you do. If he knows more than the police chief, that's, I have to agree with Mr. Russo on this objection.
Well, based
So
upon
just
your-
rephrase your question or
Okay.
whatever you want
Based
to.
upon your experience, training, and background in accounting, do you think that you would know more about whether all monies are accounted for than the police chief?
It depends on the information that I had available to me and the information she had available to her.
But you're an expert in the area of financial information, and the police chief is an expert in the area of law enforcement. And I'm asking you, based upon your experience and expertise in accounting, wouldn't it be reasonable to assume that you had more information than the chief of police?
Again, there was an investigation conducted. If I had the paper, if I had all the documents in front of me on everything that was presented, and we both were looking at the same identical items, the information that I had and the police chief, then I would like to say yes, that I would have more. But if I don't have all the information that she might have, then she might know better than I do. I just don't know that unless we knew we had the identical information that we're looking at.
Well, where would she get any information about monies being accounted for?
All I tell you is through her investigation process, which I was not part of.
So you're saying the chief financial officer was not part of the investigation where the statement was made that all monies were accounted for?
I was not part of that investigation.
And is Ms. Baird, did you prepare something like this for any other school?
Not in this summary format.
Is Ms. Ross, an African-American older woman, the only school that you prepared this kind of document for?
We prepared this document because we had concerns about an audit that we conducted at a school, having to do nothing about what ethnic or gender the principal was. And it was to summarize our findings of that school to make it easy for everybody to look at, because otherwise we would have handed you a stack of work papers that, if you think this is confusing, you wouldn't have understood what those papers say, because
Well, I'm not confused.
there are lots of tick marks on there that denote all kinds of things. So we were just trying to make it easy for everybody to say, these are the summary of the findings that we're concerned about.
Okay. And the only person you did that for was for the African-American older woman at Metzger.
We did it for Metzger Middle School, and we would have done it for any school, regardless of who was the principal, if we would have had the same findings.
But please, I'm asking you yes or no.
I'm answering your question.
I'm asking you yes or no. I'm asking for a yes or no answer.
Excuse me, I'm going to object. He's answered the question.
Yes, sir.
If any individual campus principal had the same problems that were exhibited at the Metro campus, the same kind of work would have been done, the same kind of process would have been followed, the same kind of information would have been provided. The fact of the matter is, there is
You
no
want to
other.
testify, that's fine.
There is no.
But
Wait a minute,
no, I
sir.
wanna
Wait a minute.
object.
He's
He's trying
speaking,
to
Judge.
testify.
Judge, he's
trying to
speaking.
testify.
Give
He's
him
trying to
he has the
testify.
right to let him
We're
speak.
not going to tolerate that.
Okay, well,
We're not gonna
Mr.
testify that.
Judge,
I'm
let's do
asking a
this.
yes or no
He has
question.
answered the question, sir. He's answered your question
He
twice.
has not answered my
Okay?
question. He told
So
me he
we're
did
gonna
not
move
answer
on.
Yes
You-
or no.
One at a time, please.
Okay, sir.
He didn't answer yes or no. I
Sir.
asked for a yes or no answer.
Sir, he answered the question. Move on.
Do you know Ms. Ross?
Definitely. I've known her for a long time.
Did you know her before you did this?
Definitely.
And did you know her, you've known that she's been working for the district for how long?
She or I?
She has been working for the district?
I don't know, 13, 18 years? For
Okay,
quite a
you
long
did an
time.
audit last year at her location,
We did.
and you found the same problems this year that you did the year before.
Not all the same problems.
Okay, but you found most of the same problems?
Not most of the same problems. We found some that were similar, but we found a lot more this year that were very different than last year's problems.
Okay, and please help me catalog them. First is the signature question.
There's an issue with the signatures.
All right, but
The second
you,
one-
you didn't have, did you have any information about whether or not Lauren Hopkins had permission to do that?
No, sir.
Did you have any information that Mr. Ross received monies that were not due him?
No, sir, not initially.
Well, you said not initially.
Well, I mean, no, we don't have any documentation, so we don't know due or not due. We
Okay. You
didn't
just
know.
didn't have documentation.
We still don't. Right.
You don't know if he delivered goods or services because
Still
you
don't.
never went to him to ask him, did you do this? Did you?
That's correct.
And what is custom identification system? Do you know what that is?
No, sir, I sure don't.
Would that be the IDs for the students?
I'd rather not say because I don't know.
Okay, and it says customer IDs, and they had all their documentation, except the original invoice wasn't attached. And there's a question about mathematical accuracy.
Correct. They paid from a quote, according to the note, they paid from a quote, and when you looked at the documentation, the amount that was paid for was not the amount that was on the quote.
Okay, and did you see what it was? It doesn't say how much it was.
It's in the documents that were provided to you, sir. I don't have them with me, but
Okay. Was it more than $100 difference?
I couldn't tell you right off the top of my head.
Do you have something with you that could tell you?
I don't have it with me. It wasn't entered as an exhibit, I don't believe.
Okay, all right. Is there a listing anywhere of the people who failed to have sufficient documentation this past year?
There would be other report memos, like the ones we would issue in Metzger normally. So there's those memos that we would have to reference individually, but there's not a listing. We would look at each individual memo to see what their issues were at that particular campus.
Judge Conley, sir, I'm going to limit the cross-examining this witness to 5 more minutes. We have to move on, okay? We're
Yeah,
already
I
over
didn't know you were in
his
a
2
hurry.
hours, okay?
I mean, this is this woman's life. So, I mean,
Okay.
I don't know what your schedule is, but for her, she's here as long as
Okay,
it takes
well,
to get it
we
right.
need to move on. We're moving on here, okay? Thank you, sir.
Well, in the interest of moving on, has there been any other report like this done on any other middle school during your tenure here?
No, sir.
Thank you.
You bet.
Pass the witness.
Mr. Elizondo, have you ever experienced any campus that has had as many problems that are reflected in Exhibit 20?
No, sir. We did have an issue at a school a while back, and there were disciplinary actions taken there as well.
If you had any other campus that exhibited the kind of problems that are reflected in Exhibit 20, would you have recommended any kind of action be taken?
I'm sorry, repeat that one more time?
Yes, sir. Would you have recommended any action or taken any steps if you had any other campus that exhibited the same number of problems as were exhibited by Metzger Middle School?
We would have taken the exact same steps.
Would it made no difference who the principal was?
No, sir.
Isn't it the whole point of requiring documentation to be able to avoid having any problems arise, any questions arise with respect to how funds are paid out from the district campus activity funds?
Yes, sir. And when those questions do arise, we want to have documentation to be able to show that they were spent properly, that there was a good reason for that expenditure.
Do you think, in connection with the reports that are given to the campus principals, that such as the one in Exhibit number 17, do you think it would be appropriate for a principal to simply hand that over to the campus secretary and say, here, take care of these, make sure it doesn't happen again?
I would like to think not, because we do take those things very seriously. That's why we issue the memorandum, and in the memo, it's also going to the supervisor of the principal. So I would expect the principal to be more proactively involved in correcting those issues, both reviewing what happened in the past and making sure it doesn't happen in the future. And that is why in the packet, there's an acknowledgement that talks about the responsibility of the principal with those funds.
In your opinion, did Ms. Ross carry out her responsibilities in following up on the audit report that's reflected in Exhibit number 17?
There's a signature that says that she acknowledged it, but based on the findings of the audit in the succeeding year, I have to say that I kind of find that hard to believe.
I have no further questions.
Yes. Do you know what percentage of the day activity fund management should take from a principal?
No, sir, it's going to be different at different schools.
How many checks were written in the period from 2014
I do not
during
have
the
that.
school year 2014? Can we look at the check numbers to see where they start, at least the ones that you have in here, see what check numbers, where they start? I believe you had, at least on our exhibit, we have the checks that were given to us at the interview. That's our Exhibit F. And they start at 1509 and go to 1727.
Just for the record, I'm going to object. It's outside the scope of any redirect.
He just talked about what they did, what he would have done at any school that had the same problems as they had. and he did an audit based upon the problems that they had, and I was trying to figure out how many checks were covered over the period that you only audited 50 checks, or 49, out of 49, out of 50 checks?
For the year 14-15, there were 49 checks.
Okay.
Gentlemen, here's where we're at, right? We're at 2 hours on Mr. Russo's time, so I will give Mr. Russo, what you need because of the long cross-examination.
Thank you.
I only got
Judge-
2 more questions.
And,
so
okay,
I'm
and
finished.
I will give you the same time, but I gotta let nobody, we're at 2 hours right now,
Okay.
okay?
All right, Mr. Elizondo, if the first check that in this exhibit is from 6/25/14, and it goes through nine 17/15. If the check number is 1509 on the first one, and the one that we have in this one is 1727, how many checks, are these in numeric order? Are they normally in numerical order?
Sir, I don't know what you're referencing. I'm not familiar with the
Oh,
document
let
you're
me,
looking at.
may I
I'm
approach
not
the
sure.
witness, just show them this so we can move on?
Sure. I mean, if it's in this book that I have up here, if you can give me an exhibit number, I can look at it, but
Well,
I don't know.
I gave it to, it's in my exhibits that I gave, which is Exhibit F, which I'm going to bring over to you. This is check 1509, issued on 6/25/14.
Yes, sir.
All right, and that was 6/25, that's the end, that's beginning of the, I guess it's the next year. I guess we're
That's-
really paying from last year.
That's at the end of the 13-14.
But it gives us the check number to
Sir,
work with.
that's at the end of the 13-14 school
Okay.
year.
So then the next check at the beginning of the year is at 1527. So my question is, did you document what the checks between 1509 and 1527?
They probably are. I mean, they're issued sequentially. It's a computer-generated check.
Okay.
So I couldn't tell you, and I can tell you just because of the gap, that was on January the June 25th, and this is in September the 12th. There were a lot of checks written in between there as well.
Okay, so it's 1509, and let's go to $17.27, which is just in April. You have some checks on there as late as May, but you have checks on before
Okay.
that were here we go. They went up to 1749 in April. So the difference between 1509 and 1727, that alone is 208 checks
Okay.
that were written.
Okay.
And with that, based upon your experience, attorney, your background, and your involvement with the audits of the schools, are 200 to 300 checks written a year on activity funds?
Sir, I couldn't tell you. It's going to vary. Elementary schools, school by school, elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, they're all going to be different. It's going to matter on the activity that they want to do, fundraisers they're going to do that year. I couldn't tell you that's a normal or if that's too many or too little. I don't think they're going to write however many checks are required to do whatever kind of activities they need to do at their school. Sorry. They're going to write whatever checks and however many checks they need to cut for whatever kind of activities they're doing at that campus, whatever the principal has decided is okay to do at that school during that year.
And I'm trying to get a sense of the time that it takes to have to look at 300 checks, 208 checks for in this little study that we have here. There are 208 checks. Is it your position that the principal is to go and do a reconciliation on all these checks every month, every week, every?
It is my expectation, set up in our policies and rules, that the principal or one of the assistant principals on their campus is to approve every transaction. And every check has to be signed by 2 separate individuals with original signatures. And however many that is what it is, and however long it takes. If it's too much activity and the principal is saying, we're doing too much, we can't keep up with this, it's up to the principal to say, we're not going to have that fundraiser. We're not going to do that activity. because, for whatever reason it may be. I would like to think that it wouldn't be because they don't have the administrative time to review a check or to visit with the secretary about a check. But I couldn't tell you, it's up to every principal. We have the high schools that do a lot more checks than the middle schools do. And the principal or assistant principal signs every one of those checks.
Okay. So if the principal has two roles with a check, one is to approve it and sign it, and the second is to reconcile it at the end of the month.
They don't do the actual reconciliation. They review the reconciliation that's performed by the bookkeeper.
And so they're not required to look at individual checks. They just do the reconciliation.
There are canceled checks that are attached to the bank statement. And I know when I do it for our office, I look at the canceled checks and see what all's back
But you're
there.
not running a school with 900 students in it either.
No, I'm running a budget that has $140 million just for the general operating budget.
And how many people work for you?
Total, in all our departments, or just my accounting department?
Your accounting department.
5.
Okay. So we have a principal with 994 students trying to build instructional. School's been identified as Title I. And her job is to approve checks, which she does, sign checks, which she does, and then to reconcile, to accept the person who works in her office, whose job is secretary/bookkeeper, to rely upon her reconciliation. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I have no further questions.
I pass the witness.
I have no further questions. I'm ready to call the next witness.
Thank you, sir. You can step down. You want to take a 45-minute break here and get some breathing here?
Probably so. I do need to, I have a low blood sugar problem. I need to have a little bit of food.
Okay. How long you guys want to take? 45 minutes, hour?
45 minutes would be enough, I think.
45 minutes? Okay, we will be back at 1:45. Thank you. Sure.
I listed